Okay, so in this clip from the Left of Greg podcast number 23, you can watch the whole thing in entirety, but in this specific clip, we're going to be going over the OODA loop. Some of you have probably heard that already. Some of you are going, OODA what? Basically, it was a way to understand and make decisions in highly charged kinetic situations, broken down very succinctly by a guy by the name of Colonel John Boyd, who broke it down to observe, orient, decide, act. Now, that's actually a lot more complicated than it really sounds. And in this, we kind of explain what he was talking about and some of the science behind it. So I hope you enjoy.
I remember going to every brief since probably 1975, and every single brief said John Boyd, Boyd's OODA loop, John Boyd, Boyd's OODA loop. By 1980, I had started asking if, one, they had ever met John Boyd, because I saw John Boyd brief 2 times, and the briefs were not even remotely close to each other, because he was still developing the OODA loop. He was still developing his understanding of what it was that he tripped over in the dark.
And real quick on that, the OODA loop, obviously observe, orient, decide, act, is a observation and decision-making process. Colonel John Boyd came up with it, sort of stumbled on it, like you just said, in the dark, as a way to take very, very complex scientific principles and how humans make decisions into a very easy way to kind of articulate it. And he was a fighter pilot, right? So his whole thing was, how do I outsmart
the time and distance?
Yeah. So how do I get that gift of time and distance? If I can observe the enemy, orient in the direction, make the best tactical decision, right, at that moment, then I'm going to win. I'm going to win that engagement. So that's kind of a little background on the OODA loop.
And again, we expect our readers and listeners and watch observers, I guess, to do their homework. I certainly do expect that. So my point being is that I'm talking to some specialists in the D and the E ring of the Pentagon, and talking to the most brilliant scientists on the face of the planet, and everybody's throwing out the John Boyd. But when it came right down to a critical understanding of Boyd, they didn't have it. The idea is that if we take a look at the OD in the center, that's where all the decisions are made. Now, it has to be coupled with something. So you touched on it. When we start talking about the electrochemical neurotransmitters of the body, let's talk about something as simple as the pheromones. Certain smell indicators warn us prior to actually shaking hands with the person, and those may influence our decision or our reaction, or our ultimate understanding of the situation. So what I'm trying to tell you is, as smart as Boyd was, what he was trying to do is create an architecture for an understanding. That's what I'm trying to do, because no 2 situations are identical. So don't rush to an unreasonable conclusion. Now, if we take a look at the next thing, we have a hierarchy of needs. And everybody says, we have to look at Maslow's hierarchy. Okay, I love Maslow, love the name, and everybody throws Maslow out there. There's another thing that they don't understand. And Maslow's base was a college classroom.
Right.
Okay, I remember the very first time that they wanted to add a confound early in the Combat Hunter, which was originally named Urban Hunter. And Marine Corps Warfighting Lab was working with Pacific Science and Engineering and other super scientists. And what they wanted, Brian, is they wanted to add stress in the decision-making process. And the stress was, one of the students would have his hand in cold water, one of the students would have his hand in warm water. And the reason this is important to me is we're talking about a skill building, critical thinking decisions for Marines that were going to go to the most dangerous kinetic environment ever. And here we were talking about the tried and true. So abandon looking at these architectures as being this or that. Check in the box, because it doesn't work that way. It has to be fluid. It has to be in the moment, but there are certain things that we should be looking for.
Right. Okay. And on that, I know that I think the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is not something that's really kind of even taught as much anymore. I think that's kind of not gone away with, but sort of not really relevant as much, and to a number of examples why you brought up. But all right. So
thank you.
Just like
I'm
you
stressing
said,
a relevant concept.
No. But to add what you were saying is that, yeah, that's not really, that we have to look beyond that. And to touch on the OODA loop a little bit is same thing. I mean, Boyd was talking about things that most people, like you just said, anyone who uses the term, like, do you really understand? He was talking
That's my point.
physics. He was talking about mathematics. He was talking about, evolutionary biology when he developed just this.
That's what I'm talking about. We have to talk about the second law of thermodynamics. We got to talk about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. We got to talk about Gödel's incompleteness theorem. To understand what you and I do, to understand what you, Shelley, and I are taking to the masses, what we do every day, they would have to understand all of that. But what we've done is reduced it to the fact that it's much, much simpler. There was a book out. I'm still getting those jalapeno peppers from lunch. There was a book out called Left of Bang. What a novel concept, eh? Written by those two young reserve lieutenants that followed me around and said, hey, what if we steal everything he says and just write it down? But in that book, when you take a look at it, what they tried to do is go backwards. They tried to deconstruct what it took me my entire career to take a look at and wash away from. So do we use a little bit of Maslow's? No, but we use the pyramid concept.
Right.
Do we use a little bit of Boyd? Well, we only use the O and the D in the center. And does that say that those guys are charlatans? Some of them. But no, what we're trying to say is that there's a rapid, like, for example, if I see that you've got a bumper sticker on your car that says, you can have my gun when you pry it from my cold, dead hands. Okay. First thing comes into my mind, if I'm going to do a traffic stop on that sled, this guy might be armed, but it might not be his car. So now what you've done is you've created a vacuum by saying this might be true, but are there any other artifacts and evidence to support that conclusion?